Nathan from Prayer Mountain. I just want to share with you a message that God put in my heart about his love. So in John 15, Jesus tells us that there's no higher love than to lay down your life for your friends. He says there's no purer devotion. There's no more selfless act than to die in somebody's place. And soon after Jesus says this, he lives that love out for us, and he dies a sinner's death that he didn't deserve. That was supposed to be my cross, but he died on it for me, and he loved me with the highest love possible. In Romans 5, verse 8, Paul says Christ clearly shows his love for us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. In the few verses before this, Paul says, he says, it makes sense for someone to die for a good man, but for me, I'm the chief of sinners. He says, I was a persecutor of the church. I was a persecutor of Christ himself. He even says I was an enemy of God. Yet despite all this, God loved him unconditionally, and he loves us the same way. So there's nothing I can do to make God love me less. There's no mistake I can make that would take away from his love for me. And there's no great success that I can achieve that would make God love me more. His love is consistent, it's constant, and it never changes. And the question that I want to ask you today, God's love is never in question. It's always the same. But do you love him back? And what I found in my Christian walk is my love for God it's changing, it's fickle. I find it sometimes that I don't love God with the purest love. And 1 John 2 verse 4, he says, if anyone claims to know God and doesn't habitually follow his commandments, that person is a liar and the truth is not in him. And I don't say this for condemnation, but I say this for self-evaluation, that we can all look at ourselves and say, do I really love Jesus? Do I really love this man that gave his life for me? And what are his commandments that we are to follow? In John 14, Jesus says, if anyone loves me, they'll follow my commandments. And in the very next chapter, he says, this is my commandment, that you love one another and unselfishly seek the best for one another. Are we loving one another? When a teacher of the law came to Jesus, he said, Jesus, what are the most important commandments? He said, love me with everything and love your neighbor like you love yourself. See, this isn't a long list of do's and don'ts that we live our life by. Love covers a multitude of sins. If I love God, then I won't sin against him. And I'm asking for you to evaluate yourselves and say, do I really love Christ like he's loving me? One of the purest pictures of devotion that we see in the Bible is found in Luke 7 when Jesus is eating at Simon the Pharisee's house. And this woman who's a known sinner, she's notorious as a sinner, comes into the house and she breaks an alabaster jar and she pours it on Jesus' head, expensive perfume, and she begins to kneel at his feet and weep, and she's wiping her tears off with her hair and she's just loving on Jesus. And this Pharisee, Simon, he says, Jesus, if you were a prophet, you would know what sort of woman this was. Simon's saying, look at her. She doesn't follow your commandments. She doesn't really love you. But Jesus' response to Simon is, he who's forgiven much loves much. He said, Simon, of you and this woman loves me. This is what love looks like. This alabaster jar the woman had, it meant much more to her than just expensive perfume. Bible scholars agree that this was most likely a dowry given to her by her father. This thing was her entire future, her marriage, her finances in the future. This was everything to her. And she broke it at Jesus' feet and said, if I can have one thing, I want it to be Jesus. And my question for this church, my question for this generation, my question for myself is, do I love Jesus like this woman did? Where I'm willing to break an alabaster jar and say, Jesus, I'll sacrifice anything. Jesus, I'll do anything if I can just grow in this relationship with you. Jesus, nothing else matters if I can just have you. You are my everything. And my prayer for everyone listening to this, my prayer for everyone who's listening to this video, is that you would be inspired to seek Jesus in the secret place and to really go after him, and so you could really say that I love him too.